travel is often seen as a gateway to cultural exchange, personal growth, and unforgettable experiences. For Americans, the power of a U.S. passport opens doors to countless global destinations. However, not every country rolls out the welcome mat. In fact, some places actively discourage or outright ban American visitors due to strained political relations, historical grievances, or safety concerns. From the tightly controlled borders of North Korea to the politically fraught landscapes of Venezuela and beyond, these destinations pose unique challenges for U.S. travelers. Whether it's navigating hostile environments, dealing with stringent visa policies, or facing anti-American sentiment, visiting these countries might make your dream vacation feel more like a diplomatic mission. Before packing your bags and booking that flight, take a closer look at these 10 countries where Americans aren't exactly greeted with open arms. Understanding the reasons behind these restrictions might not only save you from potential trouble but also offer insights into the complex web of international relations. Ready to explore the flip side of wanderlust? Let's dive in. 10. Somalia. Somalia does not welcome Americans primarily due to the country's volatile security situation. The presence of militant groups like Al-Shabaab, ongoing civil unrest, and rampant terrorism make it extremely dangerous for foreign nationals, including Americans. The U.S. Department of State has issued a "Do Not Travel" advisory for Somalia, highlighting risks such as terrorist attacks, kidnappings, and violent crimes. Additionally, Somalia's weak central government and lack of stable law enforcement further exacerbate these risks, making it a perilous destination for Americans. While Somalia's stance towards Americans is not explicitly driven by anti-American sentiment, the country's internal conflicts and external perceptions of U.S. policies contribute to a challenging environment for American visitors. The U.S. involvement in regional security efforts, such as containing Al-Shabaab, also plays a role in the geopolitical dynamics affecting American travel to Somalia. 9. North Korea. North Korea views the U.S. as an imperialist adversary responsible for the division of the Korean peninsula and ongoing sanctions, which it blames for its economic struggles. Anti-American rhetoric is central to North Korea's political propaganda to maintain internal control and justify its authoritarian rule. The North Korean government has a history of detaining U.S. citizens under accusations of espionage or hostile acts. This creates significant risks for Americans traveling there, compounded by the lack of formal diplomatic relations between the two countries. Since 2020, North Korea has implemented strict border controls, initially citing COVID-19 concerns. These measures have evolved into broader restrictions on foreign travel and trade, further isolating the country from the outside world, including Americans. 8. China. The U.S. has imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, which China has responded to with its own tariffs on U.S. agricultural products. This ongoing trade war creates tension between the two nations. There is increased competition in areas like technology and military, which adds to the tension. China has also outlined red lines that the U.S. is unlikely to respect, further straining relations. The U.S. and China have significant political disagreements, including issues related to Taiwan and human rights, which contribute to a chilly atmosphere for American visitors. 7. South Africa. The South's reluctance to welcome Americans in 2025 primarily stems from strained international relations and controversial U.S. policies under the Trump administration. U.S.-South Africa ties have worsened due to disagreements over issues like land expropriation and U.S. foreign aid cuts. Former President Trump froze $400 million in HIV/AIDS funding, citing rights violations, which deeply impacted South Africa. Additionally, South African leaders criticized U.S. support for Israel, further straining relations. In Latin America, Trump's threats of tariffs, territorial disputes, e.g., Panama Canal, and aggressive migration policies have alienated regional leaders. These actions have led countries to strengthen ties with other global powers like China as a counterbalance to U.S. influence. 6. Mexico. The U.S. has threatened tariffs on Mexican goods, which could harm Mexico's economy. Although a recent agreement delayed these tariffs, tensions remain. The U.S. has pressured Mexico to control immigration and drug trafficking, which Mexico views as intrusive and challenging to its sovereignty. Mexico's alignment with certain authoritarian regimes and its internal political changes have complicated its relationship with the U.S., particularly under the Trump administration. 5. India. The U.S. has criticized India's trade policies, including high tariffs and barriers to market access. India, in turn, is frustrated with U.S. demands for concessions and sees these as unfair. U.S. immigration policies, particularly restrictions on H-1B visas heavily used by Indian workers, have caused friction. India views these policies as protectionist and detrimental to its IT industry. India's close ties with Russia, especially in defense, and its independent stance on global issues often clash with U.S. expectations for alignment in countering China. The U.S. has expressed concerns about democratic backsliding in India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, including issues related to religious freedom and press freedom. India views such criticism as interference in its internal affairs. Separatist activities among the Indian diaspora in the U.S., coupled with allegations of Indian government involvement in incidents abroad, have added tension. 4. Germany. Germany has tightened its immigration laws, focusing on reducing asylum benefits and increasing deportations for rejected applicants. These measures reflect growing domestic concerns about immigration and resource allocation, which may indirectly affect perceptions of foreigners, including Americans. Political parties gaining influence in Germany are advocating stricter controls on immigration and citizenship. This includes reversing recent liberalizations, such as shorter residency requirements for citizenship, which might create a less welcoming environment for all immigrants. While U.S.-Germany relations remain strong overall, there are underlying policy disagreements, particularly regarding global issues like climate change and relations with China. These differences may contribute to a perception of divergence between the two nations. 3. Brazil. Brazil has pursued an autonomous foreign policy under President Lula, including efforts to mediate peace in the Ukraine war. Lula criticized the U.S. for its role in encouraging the conflict, which led to sharp public rebukes from the White House. Brazil has deepened ties with China, including collaboration on technology, e.g., Huawei, and trade. This stance contrasts with U.S. concerns over China's influence in Latin America, creating friction between Washington and Brasilia. Brazil's defense of Iran's uranium enrichment program and rejection of certain non-proliferation protocols have long been points of contention with the U.S., which views these actions as undermining global security efforts. While both nations share commitments to addressing climate change, broader geopolitical differences have hindered meaningful collaboration on transnational challenges. 3. Russia. Tensions between Russia and the United States in 2025 are marked by significant developments, particularly in the context of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The Trump administration has been working towards a reset in relations with Russia, which includes efforts to negotiate a peace agreement in Ukraine. This approach has led to increased tensions with European allies, who remain supportive of Ukraine against Russian aggression. Bilateral talks between the U.S. and Russia took place in Saudi Arabia in February 2025, focusing on normalizing diplomatic relations and working towards a Ukraine peace agreement. However, these talks have been criticized for excluding Ukrainian and European representation. The U.S. has proposed a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine, which Ukraine has expressed readiness to accept. However, Russia's response has been cautious, with demands for broader conditions such as halting foreign military aid to Ukraine. The U.S. stance on Ukraine has diverged significantly from that of Europe. The U.S. voted with Russia at the UN in February 2025, marking a departure from European positions that continue to condemn Russian actions in Ukraine. Concerned about potential U.S. security guarantees, European countries are increasing defense spending and exploring alternative security arrangements, including a coalition of the willing to support Ukraine. While the Trump administration seeks to improve relations with Russia, historical tensions remain, particularly over issues like Syria and sanctions. The U.S. has faced criticism for softening its stance on Russian disinformation and sanctions evasion. 2. Iran. The Trump administration's reinstatement of the maximum pressure policy, including new sanctions targeting Iran's oil sector, has significantly escalated tensions. These sanctions aim to cripple Iran's economy, which Iran views as an attempt to force it into negotiations under duress. Iran sees negotiations with the U.S. as a form of capitulation due to the aggressive stance taken by the Trump administration. Iranian leaders have banned negotiations with the U.S., viewing them as a means for the U.S. to impose new demands rather than genuinely resolve issues. The U.S. has engaged in military actions against Iran-backed groups, such as airstrikes in Yemen, which Iran perceives as direct threats. This has heightened tensions and made Iran wary of U.S. intentions. The U.S. demands that Iran dismantle its nuclear program, which Iran refuses to do. Iran claims its nuclear activities are for peaceful purposes, but the U.S. and its allies are skeptical, fearing a nuclear-armed Iran. Iran's support for regional proxies like the Houthis in Yemen has led to U.S. retaliation, further straining relations. The U.S. holds Iran responsible for these groups' actions, which Iran denies. 1. Venezuela. The U.S. has imposed severe economic sanctions on Venezuela, targeting its oil sector and key officials. These sanctions have significantly hurt Venezuela's economy, leading to resentment against U.S. policies. The U.S. has historically supported opposition leaders, such as Juan Guaidó, and sought to undermine Nicolas Maduro's government. This is seen by the Venezuelan leadership as interference in its sovereignty. Venezuela accuses the U.S. of backing coup attempts, including the 2002 coup against Hugo Chavez and later efforts to remove Maduro from power. Venezuela has strengthened ties with U.S. rivals like Russia, China, and Iran, viewing the U.S. as a threat to its alliances and regional influence. The U.S. criticizes Venezuela's human rights record and authoritarian governance, which Maduro's government rejects as hypocritical and politically motivated.